Welcome you all. Here we go. I would like to welcome you all to our event tonight, Dear Black Women, a conversation about mental health, wellness, and self-love. I am Nicole Kmack, and I am a member of the Washington, D.C. Alumnae Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And I am also a co-chair of the Journey to Wellness Committee. And so we are happy to have you all here tonight. Our president couldn't be here today, Cherie Brown Jackson, but she wanted to be here so bad. And what I will say about our president is that she really pushed for us to address mental health and to provide these opportunities to talk about mental health in our community, especially as we think about the pandemic and the impact that it's having on all of us. I remember when she reached out to me, she's like, we need to have a program specific to mental health. And so she really wanted to be here today, and she has been like a true supporter of this topic. And so I just want to shout her out. And then Soror Tam, I don't know if you want to say anything. I don't want to put you on the spot either.
Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and bring greetings on behalf of our chapter president. So good evening, everyone. I'm Tamara Walls-Lee. I am the second vice president of the Washington, D.C. Alumnae Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. On behalf of our chapter president, Cherie Brown Jackson, and our over 600 members, I extend to you a very warm welcome, whether you're sorors or guests. Thank you for joining us for this important discussion to help us as Black women really prioritize our mental and physical well-being, which my soror, Dr. Nicole Kmack, has indicated is of great importance, in particular to our president, Cherie Brown Jackson. Now, physical and mental health is a component of our 5-point programmatic thrust, and our Journey to Wellness Committee, who's sponsoring this event, is very committed to supporting initiatives that really seek to address the challenges of having us live holistically and healthy lives. So that is why this evening's event, this webinar, Dear Black Women, is so important and is so timely. So I really want to begin by thanking the committee for its work in planning this. Thanks to our panelists, of whom you will be introduced shortly. And thank you for joining us for this important discussion. So I'll turn it back over to you, Soror Kmack.
Thank you. Thank you. So just as you were saying, we recognize just what we are dealing with as we think about 2 years of living through a pandemic, as we think about what that means for Black women, and really what that means for our health and wellness. I'll tell you all, and then I'm going to introduce our panelists, but I'll tell you some of what led to this topic is as we're thinking about, I recently had this conversation with someone about they're like, oh, you know, high functioning depression and Black women sort of dealing with high functioning depression. And I said to her, I'm like, I know why they say that. Clinically, that is not a term. It's just depression. And it is the way that Black women have adapted that we call it high functioning, but it's depression. And we need to recognize that Black women are dying because we're not treating depression. And so that is, we want to have an open and honest conversation about our health, about our wellness, about the things that sort of get into the way of us taking care of ourselves in the way that we need to. So this will be an open discussion. We have some dynamic panelists, and I am excited to introduce them. We want you to add your questions to the chat. And then there also will be opportunities at the end to ask questions, but please, please, please add your questions to the chat because we will be sure to incorporate it and address it as we go through. So I will start to introduce the panelists, and I'm starting the way that I see you all. So first up is Dr. Danielle Busby. And Danielle is one of the co-founders with me of Black Mental Wellness. She is a licensed clinical psychologist, and she is currently located in Houston, Texas. She is also a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated as well. Sorry, letting some more people in. But Danielle is currently an assistant professor at the University of Texas Medical Branch, and she primarily works with youth and families experiencing depressive symptoms, suicide risk and symptoms related to trauma and grief. Danielle has done research and published articles that are all related to child trauma, youth and suicide prevention, racial discrimination among Black youth, and the psychological effects of neighborhood stressors, such as community violence exposure among African-American adolescents. So welcome, Danielle. Next,
everyone.
Next up, we have Stacy Julian, and she is the Chief Wellness Officer of the Fit Life Squad. And if you are not following her on social media, you should, because she's just amazing. I actually work out with Stacy twice a week. So she'll tell us more about what she does, but she offers personal training, group fitness classes, and nutrition coaching services. And then we have Dr. Pastel Birchsmith, who is also known as Dr. Potts. And she is also a member of the Washington, D.C. Alumnae Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. And she has over 25 years of experience as a pharmacist. So she has served as a clinical psychiatric pharmacist at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. And she currently serves as the team leader in the Office of Compounding Quality and Compliance at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And also to point out, in her spare time, she is a co-host of a weekly podcast that is on Facebook Live every Wednesday. And the group is, I'll say, GAWS, and you can look her up, but they do address topics related to mental health and wellness as well. And she'll be able to share some of her personal experience with all of us. So welcome, everyone, and welcome to our speakers. Let me just let some more people in. Okay, there we go. All right. So again, if you have questions or anything that you want to add, please feel free to add those things to the chat. But I just want to start off in terms of talking with our panelists, and I'll let you all, you can just jump in, and we want this to feel like a discussion. But could you please just tell us a little bit about you and your experiences as it relates to mental health and wellness? It can be personal experiences and the work that you do as it relates to Black women. We'll sort of leave it open.
I can go ahead and start. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to join this very important discussion. My experience is very recent. Well, I've had a very recent experience with mental health and depression, a personal experience. As stated before, the pandemic has been very challenging. And I spoke to Dr. Kamek about some of my experiences a few months ago. I found myself in times of quiet, very teary, sad, and it became very challenging for me after a few months. You know, I after bouts of crying, you know, I realized that I was really, you know, depressed. So it pushed me to seek help. So I'm here just to put a face to depression as a high functioning Black woman, because I was excelling on my job, being a mom, you know, doing all these other things. But in the moments of quiet is when I felt the most pain. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to be here, Nicole. It's a joy to be here with Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, having this discussion tonight. Personally, I would say my personal story is more about family members. I have close family members who have been dealing with depression for years, decades, and I am a source of support for one of those family members. So I'm in it a lot through her. And so I think I've reached out to Nicole about it, you know, support for family members who are dealing with family members who have depression, because it can be a lot. It can be a lot. So that is my personal experience with depression. But I also know, in terms of mental health, that what I do for a living for others is helpful for those who find themselves in a low place sometimes who I work out with and train. And sometimes those sessions become therapy sessions for them. Sometimes they come in, in a low mood to a workout, and then they end on a higher, happier mood. And so I know that what I'm doing is helping them with their mental health. And so that makes me feel good. We'll talk about exercise and the relationship between mental health a little later, but there's definitely a connection there. Definitely. And that's all.
Hello, everyone. Also really happy to be here today. And thank you to the other panelists for your responses here. When I think about my own journey, I like the breaking it up between the personal and professional, because I think for me personally, I've also been really involved in just like the mental health system for decades, largely because of my family. So I have a really close family member who struggled with suicide ideation and attempts in her childhood and in her adulthood. And, just being up close and seeing how difficult that's been for her and how many things she's had to navigate, and just trying to get treatment and trying to figure out the thing that's best for her has given me a lot of insight personally. And then I think also for me, just as a mental health professional, I've always tried to be intentional about my own self-care and like taking out time to seek therapy, just because we carry a lot, right? Like I think I would lie, like I do trauma and grief work, right? So I hear a lot of tough things. And so I think for me personally, being in therapy has been helpful for just managing things related to my own family. But then also, I've really walked into a caregiver role as my parents have aged. And I'm at that time in life where I'm really having to lead a lot of things for them. And that just comes with its own stressors. And I've dealt with that, in therapy, and how do you kind of balance all the hats and roles and responsibilities. And then professionally, of course, in the founding of Black Mental Wellness, this is a topic I'm passionate about. I think it's something that if we talk about more in our community, people will know what resources are available and just have a different range of perspectives of how to cope when things are tough.
As I was listening to like each of your stories, it's like, okay, hearing different experiences from Black women, both whether it's those direct impacts or those indirect ways that we're impacted by mental health. From your standpoint, what would you say are some of the challenges or like the barriers that get in the way of Black women specifically sort of taking care of ourselves and addressing those stressors that are coming up?
Something that comes to mind for me first is just those initial feelings you have, at least I had, around just guilt for, giving, I should be able to handle it, or, I recognize that I have certain skills other people don't have. So you have this guilt when you kind of have to be really like firm about a boundary, or you have to really protect time for you, even though people really need you to use your time in other ways for them. And so I think that's something that stands out for me in our community broadly. Like when I talk to friends and I talk to other people, it's just like the weight of the responsibility and just sometimes having that guilt associated with choosing you and being intentional about that.
I think in addition to the guilt, with my personal experience, I didn't allow myself a lot of grace. We tend to wear these masks and put on these capes as Black women a lot. I mean, we all have friends. If we're not the friend with Superwoman syndrome, we definitely know someone who has Superwoman syndrome. And in that, I neglected my own feelings when I could easily recognize it in others. So it took me getting to the point where I just felt out of control, to seek help. So just giving myself grace and acknowledging my human side was something that I had to, I'm still working on.
You just spoke to like my favorite word during this pandemic. It's just been about grace, because I feel so often in therapy, I'm reminding Black women of like, just give yourself grace. You're taking on everything. And as you spoke about the cape that Black women put on, someone talked about, it's like we put on an armor before we even leave the house. which if you think about armor, yes, it might protect you from what's happening in the world, but it also keeps in everything, even the things you need to release and handle and take care of. It keeps it all inside. And I have my own personal feelings about this term, but I'll ask you all, like, what do you think, or how do you think the strong Black woman image, or like how, this is portrayed in media, in our culture, in our families, like as we think about the strong Black woman, how do you think that impacts our mental health? Like, is it something that is a strength, or is it something that can be hurtful at times, or is it a combination?
I think it's a combination for sure. I think it's inspiring sometimes to see strong Black women, and you're motivated by it, and sometimes it'll push you to to reach your goals when you see somebody who seems like they're really strong and got it all taken care of and just on it, makeup done professionally, at the top. And we are inspired by that, but at the same time, we need to also, like Pastel said, we need to understand that we are human too, and that we do have emotions. I feel like when I'm at home, I'm a single mom of a 10-year-old, I am doing it all, and my son sees me doing it all. And part of me wants him to see me handling it, right? Because he counts on me, and I want him to know that I'm always there and I got it taken care of. But at that same time, if I'm having a day where I'm low, where I want to cry, I don't, because I'm there, I'm taking care of him, and I need to be strong for him. So I think Black women do that, period. We're strong for everybody else. We're strong, and we don't allow ourselves that time to have moments of vulnerability.
So how do you think we can create the space to have those moments of vulnerability? Because on the one end, it's like, okay, we're human. We need to give ourselves grace. We need to have the full range of feelings. But then on the other end is like this thing where it's like, I have to push through, I have to keep going. But how do we find balance in that?
I think one thing that we can do is lean on our support systems more than we do. And I think we're sometimes afraid to bother people with our challenges that our emotional challenges that we're having. So I think part of that is making that time to make a phone call or reach out to somebody who we know will be supportive of us, and just making that. We'll probably talk about self-care a lot more, but making that time for self-care is important, even if we need to schedule that time, that quiet time, that time for a walk, that time for exercise, that time to do something that is uninterrupted time that's all about ourselves. And maybe during that time, I know sometimes if I'm running, I'm working out things in my head, emotionally. So if we can find those opportunities to do that and make them a priority for ourselves, that's one way.
I love this comment from Barbara, where it's, if your children don't see you vulnerable. Oh, it cut off. I thought I saw the rest. But I was thinking about that, and maybe Dr. Busby, you can add some context to this, because I go back and forth. On the one end, it's like I'll push through as a parent, and I'm going to just keep going, and I'll deal with the emotions later. On the other end, there are those times where I have those honest conversations with my daughter, who's 9, but she's right here looking. But I'll have those honest conversations about, this is really hard, or I'm really stressed out right now, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I go back and forth, because you don't want to put too much on your children, but at the same time, I try to provide her balance, and like, you see me working and doing all the things, but it's not easy either. So I don't know, but Dr. Busby, in your work with children and families, like, how do you help families navigate that? Or what are some ways that as parents, we can think about balancing that a little more?
Yeah, I'm glad we actually, at least, the question got started, because I really wanted to actually focus on vulnerability just from the initial question. But I'll answer the first question about just parents and families. And I think, that balance is important, right? Because in life, I'm gonna be honest, like we, sometimes we're able to push through for work, and sometimes we just don't have it, right? And it's the same in the home, et cetera, right? So this is like a cross setting. And so you don't want to always For example, go to your boss and say, I just don't have it together today. But sometimes you want to be able to do that. So I think you have to do that similarly with your kids and regarding being honest about it, what it is, but then also that communication piece, like naming, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now. And then naming what you're going to do for yourself. It kind of helps you be more accountable, right? Like, I just need about 5 minutes of quiet, or I'm just going to go take a few deep breaths. So you can also model for them that even when things are stressful, it's okay for that thing to exist. It's okay for that emotion to be there, right? But what are we going to do about it in a way that's healthy, in a way that's not, harmful to other people? And I think we can use it as an opportunity for learning. And I feel like it's for yourself and for them, right? For them to see it and for you to be able to be intentional about the practice. But I think in general, how do we create that balance when we talk about strong Black woman, like the word, the phrase, the how it can be inspiring, but then how it can kind of take away some of the humanness that we need and data has shown us has negatively impacted health outcomes for us in a range of incidents, right? Is the practice of vulnerability. And I really thought about that when you first said it, Stacey, as it relates for opportunities for vulnerability, right? So if we challenge ourselves to practice those acts with people who feel safe, and it could just be honest about how you actually feel. I think when people ask you how you're doing, it's natural to just be like, oh, everything's good, just doing the thing, being strong, whatever, versus being like, oh, wow, I'm tired. It's been a really rough week. But thank you for asking, and just kind of keep like being honest in those moments. But I think what has to happen on the flip side of that is, as a group, we need to be able to catch those spaces. Like, I think sometimes it's uncomfortable to hear someone's not doing great. So it's like, oh, it's going to get better. Oh, we know it's, and it's fine for that. We could be motivating, but also letting it sit and say, oh yeah, I've been there. I had those types of weeks before. I understand what you're saying. And letting it be just that, right? Like, there's no pressure or motivation to change it. And I think we have to practice it in our own acts of like expressing it, but also receiving it and letting that space, exist for us that doesn't equal overcoming all the time. I mean, that's a part of our story, but it's not the only part. It's other parts in there too.
I'd like to add, I think we don't recognize that I personally am the daughter of the silent generation, meaning kids are not seen, not heard, so you don't, my parents, my mother did not talk about how she felt. I may have heard her crying behind a closed door, and I take for granted how much I modeled my mother as far as my the expression of vulnerability. So really, I've been taking a look at those historical behaviors that have led to me putting on this mask and this cape. Today I actually went to therapy, and I was very upset at therapy. And at the end of therapy, my therapist said, "Well, do you need to go to the bathroom, to the restroom, to clean up your face or whatever?" And I said, I'm going to walk out here as my human self today. I don't care. I just didn't care that people were going to see me puffy and just exposed. Practice exposure. It's very important to practice exposure, and it takes practice because it is so uncomfortable for people to see you, and I'm one of those strong friends, but now I'm asking my tribe, look, check on me. I am not okay. It's hard for them to hear, but my tribe knows where I am because I can lean on them for support, and vice versa. It's very important.
I'm so glad that you said that, and thank you for sharing your experience, because what we so often see, and I'll tell you, even in the therapy room, Black women apologize for crying, or it's a lot of the should statements. I shouldn't be feeling like this. I should be able to handle this. Or even Black women going to therapy and it's like, I can't tell anyone that I'm coming here because they're going to look at me differently. And, so much of the work is just creating a safe space to feel. Like, how can you begin healing if you can't even allow yourself the space in this vulnerable moment to be human, to feel the feelings, to sort of process what you're going through. And I think so much of that comes back to us redefining what strength is. So, parents and grandparents and the generations before us, you're absolutely right. There wasn't space to always talk about what they were feeling. Maybe we didn't always have the tools to talk about those things. But it doesn't mean we have to be stuck there, right? Like, we can start to think about new ways of living, of expressing, of coping. And that takes strength, because you're doing something that's totally out of your comfort. For you to get up here and say, I'm going to walk out as my human self, that takes strength. Or, as I remind people in therapy all the time, it's like, it takes strength to actually talk about the things that you would rather avoid. When I have to dig in deep and deal with the stuff that I rather package up pretty, put a little bow on it, that's some strength right there, because you much rather not deal with it. So thank you for opening up that space. Just want to acknowledge some of the comments from the chat. So Barbara was able to come back, and she said, if your children don't see you vulnerable, how will they know it's all right to need help, especially your daughters? And so I do think that it goes back to what you were saying in terms of that model of parents, like as you think about your own parents, and the model that was set, and how can we set that model for future generations to be more open? Okay, so I guess a question, how do we know, or how do women know when it's time to seek therapy, when it's time to seek more help, or to lean on their, support system, or to do something different? How do they know?
I think some initial things to really pay attention to is just like, how are you generally just functioning across your spaces? So like, do you notice any changes in the home? Like, are you feeling like I'm not able to get anything done? Or are you seeing more problems come up in relationships? Or does work feel like it's really difficult to kind of get through? So I think those are things to just pay attention to, how you're functioning in your spaces. But then also just catching, I think we see a lot of mood swings, right? Like when you just catch yourself being more irritable. I feel like sometimes you'll catch on to like just feeling more stressed generally, like paying attention, like you said, to that mind-body connection. Like when you're feeling more stressed, it may show up in your body in different ways. And just kind of thinking about those things, like, are you sleeping? Are you eating? Some of those basics, I think, are some main things that give indication that things may be concerning.
And so we often hear about this connection, and Stacey, you started to talk about it a little bit too, like as we think about that connection between like the physical, the nutrition, and our mental health. In what ways are they connected?
Well, Nicole, aren't you happy at the end of my class?
It depends on which week, because yesterday was a bit crazy, just so I can put it out there. You were...
Okay, note taken, note taken. Well, with that, I would say that research proves time and time again that exercise releases those endorphins, those happy feelings. And so you may come into or not feel like exercising or working out, whatever activity is that you do. But maybe by the middle, toward the end, those endorphins are just kicking, and then you're like right in it, and you're in your zone, and you're feeling good, and you're motivated. So that's one thing that exercise does for us. It makes us feel better. It boosts our mood, and it does reduce depression and anxiety. For the same reason, you come into that activity or just going for a walk, being outside, feeling the sun, moving your body makes you feel better. I think for some people, it reduces loneliness. If you're in a group class or something, you have that social interaction, even when it's virtual, there's a little interaction. You're not feeling lonely at that moment. You're part of a community, you're part of a tribe at that moment. And so there's a sense of inclusion. And so that makes people feel good. And then there's a confidence. There's a confidence of getting through an activity that might seem impossible, in the beginning, but just getting through it and taking those steps for your health. each time you do that, you get stronger and you gain more confidence. So those are the ways that come to mind for me. Yeah.
I just like to add the important, you mentioned getting out in the sun. Oh my God, vitamin D is so important, and because of we're melanated, we don't, get enough vitamin D. And I know a friend of mine, they were diagnosed with major depression, and when they measured her vitamin D levels, they were bottomed out. So she started taking a high dose of vitamin D. I know I feel better when the sun is out, and I'll get out there and walk. I just feel so much better when the sun is shining. So it's so important to make sure you get your vitamin D. And the sun is, of course, nature's antidepressant. One of them.
And I would add to it that it's a distraction. It's a healthy distraction from whatever is stressing you in that moment, right? It's a healthy way to just get away from your environment and get into a space where you're not stressed,
And I just want to anecdotally add that, like you said earlier, I think you said sometimes like when you're running, like you're doing emotional work. I recognize that sometimes like when I'm working out, I'll just be working out and then I'll remember certain things that I've just forgotten because I've had so many different things like on my mind. Is like wasn't enough space to like really clear it out. So I don't know if people ever have that experience, just kind of like that freedom that kind of comes with moving that then kind of creates a clarity for your brain that doesn't feel like it exists, even if you're not necessarily doing something and you're like in more work mode, right? So when I move my body, it's like I get a clarity that comes with that. And I think, it's evident in a lot of the evidence-based interventions that we know exist. There's a behavioral activation component. There's a part of it that really stresses the importance of movement because, like you said, the data shows that there's such a high connection in kind of releasing, those endorphins and, kind of providing those other spaces of like social support. When we think about people tend to do activities with people or even when we were, heavy in the pandemic, or some people still are like doing more virtual, but that's still like this community that you're connected to around this physical movement. So I agree with everything that's been said.
I like the way this discussion is going because we're starting to think about like, what are those things that you can do, especially when you might feel like it's like everything is, piling up and it's like, well, there's nothing I can do to come up out of this place. Something that I'm noticing with Black women specifically in therapy is that it's often all of the competing demands that get in the way. So it's like, I have to work. I have to do this for my family. I got to do this for my partner. I have to do this for the kids. I'm in this organization. I don't have time. Or, I have to cancel my session this week because I really need to go do this thing. And you see where all of the things sometimes take priority over women taking care of themselves. So what are some recommendations or suggestions for how women can create the space to take a walk or exercise or get some sunlight? What do you recommend?
Some things that have just been personally helpful for me has been really trying to get it out, get whatever the thing is that I'm trying to achieve out the way early. So when thinking about movement, for example, I try to work out in the morning just so that it's, I don't have time to talk myself out of it or something else taking over. I think another strategy that's been helpful has just been like literally scheduling it, right? So I literally put it on my calendar in a way that even if I do replace it with something else, I feel guilt or I feel something that's like, no, Danielle, you need to like work to protect this time or reschedule it somewhere. It's kind of like helps me stay accountable to myself about whatever the thing is that I think is needed. So those things have been really helpful for me.
For me, it's been having accountability partners. Someone to say, girl, what you doing? Let's go for a walk. I'm that friend a lot, and I have friends who do that as well. And I'm also in groups that will encourage me to get out and do something. I know I like massages, and I actually have a subscription I have about 2,000 massages built up. So they keep calling me like, when are you going to do it? So those type of things I really get to work on, scheduling those type of self-care things for myself. But as far as exercise, the accountability partners always works for me. If someone's out there pushing me and I know I I I feel responsible to them, and it's always great. It's always great every time because you get to reconnect, with for me with a friend, a sister, and it's always a great time. So get somebody who can push you a little bit.
I agree with all of that. And I also think sometimes we need to account for the time that we do waste too, because I think we waste time also. We get lost watching Netflix or lost doing whatever. We're on social media for an hour on Facebook responding to something, getting engaged in a conversation. While that may be helpful in some ways, when we're on social media too long, we're also wasting time that we could be using to be taking care of ourselves. So I think taking like a look at your day and just really seeing where your time wasters are and moving those things out of the way. That's how we make room for self-care, is we look at where we're wasting our time too. But I agree with what everyone has said so far. Having accountability partners, really scheduling that time, signing up for things. If you are not self-motivated, sign up for a class or, get a partner who is also wants to be in it with you and lose weight and get healthy. And make sure that person pushes you, like Pastel said. Make sure that person can push you and won't, hit the snooze button and and miss your session also. So I think both of those things are very helpful too.
I was going to add, I know people always are like, this is nearly impossible, Danielle. But one thing that I was trying to increase was just my awareness to my body. So like, not just, like, oh, I'm going to do this strategy, but more like, okay, I want to know, like, when I feel whatever way, I need to rest or I need to be more active, like being more aware of like letting my body lead me, letting how I'm currently feeling lead me instead of a list of obligations. Cause I'm normally like, it's a bunch of things I got to do and I got to make myself do them versus I get to pay attention to myself and decide, do I feel like being social? Do I want to be by myself? Do I feel like, reading a book and like be like, or maybe journaling and being reflective because there's things on my mind, or do I want to go run? Like I can kind of choose those things as they come. So I'll block days, like maybe on a weekend or something. Like I'm not scheduling anything for Saturday. I'm not scheduling, a meeting, a lunch, like nothing. Like I'm going to decide what I want to do as I go. And that's been really nice because it's like you feel no pressure and maybe in other instances you do.
I love all of those suggestions. Like, so really, I hadn't thought of it in the way that you put it, Stacey, like seeing where you're wasting your time, because if we begin to do that, we may realize we have more time than we think we do. And so just starting with the wasting of the time. And a thing that I was thinking about when you talked about social media is for some women, that's where they get a lot of those sources of stress or the pressures that we start to put on ourselves because you're looking at what other people are doing. And here we come again with the shoulds. I should be doing more. I'm not doing enough. Oh, this person is doing this and I'm only doing this. And now we get into this comparative space where something that could be used for connections has now become like this source of stress, or you're feeling worse than what you started out with. So really probably being mindful of how much you're spending on social media is important. Yeah. Okay, so we got some strategies going, like as we think about things that we can do, we know like how we can start to create time and space into our schedules so that we can hold ourselves accountable. We know that we can have accountability partners in terms of keeping us going. And I like the idea too of just scheduling things so that you always have something that you're looking forward to or that helps to keep you accountable as well. So how do people like begin to figure out what are the coping strategies? What are the things that I can do? So Danielle, as you mentioned, listening to your body and figuring out what you need, how can women begin to think about, well, what is it that I need?
I think really, I mean, there's a range of resources related to like how to kind of do your own self-assessment. And it doesn't have to be super formal. It can really just be looking at like, where do you feel like you're struggling the most, right? So I always look at like that functioning piece as my indicator, like this is feeling really heavy for whatever reason, or I'm having a really hard time, like once the day is over. So maybe I need to practice like being more intentional with the boundary about cutoff time, for example. But, you know, I think it's just one of those things where even if like, oh, I could do a little bit better, I think we think that we have to do these monumental changes all at once in order for us to be like taking that step. And I think sometimes just finding one or two really small things you can do, like 10 minutes extra in the morning, right? Or like, I know sometimes when I can just have that time to be slow and intentional about this is me time, I feel like I can show up to the world better after that. So like kind of figuring out, like we said, like where can I kind of insert? Doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world that's different, but just a small change that you might be able to feel the impact over time.
And just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please add them to the chat. We'll have some time for questions coming up shortly, but you can also add anything to the chat and we'll be sure to get to it. So I do want to go back about one topic, because I was thinking about sort of what led us to this space in terms of what Black women were dealing with and what Black women were reporting, especially as we think about the recent national attention related to suicide completions and what that looks like in Black women, and Black women often feeling like, oh, so shocked of, what is going on? I didn't know that this person was feeling this way as we think about suicide. And we know that depression can often look different as we think about how it shows up in Black women. Can you please just speak a little bit to, and Dr. Busby, I'll put the pressure on you. Can you speak a little bit to what depression is and what it looks like in Black women? Because oftentimes when you describe what some of the symptoms are, it's like this light bulb clicks and women begin to say, oh, either I feel this way or I felt this way before.
Yeah, happy to accept the pressure. So when we think about depression, we really want to be thinking about a range of symptoms. So are you just kind of feeling like down or just like kind of hard to get going? And you're noticing that you're feeling that way more than not. And so the standard typical indicator is 2 weeks or more. So paying attention to these things in that time frame. So it's natural, I think, for us to feel low or just kind of like, I don't feel like it today, right? Like that's a very common response, but are you noticing it more than not? So I think that's one. And then also just like, are you increased with irritability? Sometimes people think of like when people maybe are more snappy or just frustrated, that it's about being mad, when that could really be a symptom of your mood. Paying attention to, is your appetite changing in a particular way? Do we see an increase in weight gain or weight loss? Are we seeing an increase in time sleeping, where you're noticing you're more withdrawn or you don't enjoy the things that you used to really enjoy? It's hard to get excited about anything. And I think in general, when we hear these things, we think it looks a certain way, right? We think it looks like people walking around saying, oh my God, I'm so sad, or crying hysterically. And that's not necessarily the case. And so I think that's kind of how this like high functioning term, right? That isn't even like, it's not clinically used, but that high functioning term is happening because no one can tell. And we're still doing and showing up to the things that we've been doing prior to these experiences.
Thank you for that.
Can I add something to that?
Mm-hmm.
So another thing I think people should look at are traumatic dates like for instance, a loss of a friend, a loss of a parent, it can trigger certain emotions and which show up as depression at certain times of the year. I know I have to be very careful around this time of the year because I lost my best friend in 2007, and I always, sometimes I forget, and I'm acting a little, moody, as Dr. Busby said, and I remember, oh my God, this is the time, around her birthday when, and I have to really do things to lighten my mood, or to prepare for potentially feeling that way at this time of the year. So I know people, especially with the pandemic, people have lost loved ones, so those memories, they can flood in and, shift your mood very quickly. So to pay attention to those traumas is very important.
That's such a good point. And what we know about the body, there's this book about the body keeps the score, but like oftentimes trauma and things like that are encoded in our bodies. So even when we're not consciously thinking about it, the body is telling you something's going on. I'm feeling this way again. And I think it comes back to when we have all of these demands, we don't make space for ourselves. We don't even make space to like make the connection between what am I feeling right now? Because I wake up and I got to go. I got to do this. I got to get the kids ready. I got to get ready for work. And you don't have that awareness of what you're feeling. And so sometimes it starts with just having that pause so that you can tap into, as Dr. Busby said, like, what do I need right now? What am I feeling? And so little ways that you can start with doing that. This is why I love meditation. I love yoga because it requires me to slow down. It requires me to bring it back to this moment. And the only thing I'm focusing on is the here and now so that I can even tap into what do I need or what am I feeling? Or, oh, it's that time of year again. So now I know I need to be extra intentional about taking care of myself. I want to also put a link in the chat, and this is from the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And you can check on that, click on the link and get some more information and resources. And that number is converting to a 988 number this summer. But I want to put that out to the chat because oftentimes women are suffering in silence and we're dealing with all of these emotions, or when we're, when everything quiets down. I often hear from people, when I lay down and I don't have anything to distract me, that's when I feel the heaviness. And people don't know where to start, what to do. And sometimes those feelings can be so uncomfortable that it's like, oh no, I'd rather just be busy. I don't want to deal with that. And we know that it's just going to build up. And so we need some resources to think about when you're in those moments and times, what can you do? And so this is just one resource that you all can check out. And hopefully you get some help or information that is helpful for you. Okay. Now remember, well, I guess we could move on to some questions, but before we get there, I want us to end and start to think about how we can reimagine mental health and wellness for Black women. So how can we reimagine what that healing looks like for Black women?
I think spaces like this are important, and talking about it, really being honest about where you are, allowing people to see you, I like to say naked, it's okay to not be okay, and I'm big on your tribe, so really be particular about who you let in your space, because you need those safe and soft spaces to land, particularly with your girlfriends. It bothers me so much when women don't have good girlfriends. My girlfriends are everything to me, so yeah, that's all I have to add to that one. Yeah.
And I would add to that, being intentional about having wellness checks on the people that you care about in your life. You may not have that tribe, but maybe you could be a person who just checks in on people regularly. Sometimes when I just have a person on my mind for whatever reason, it may be not be somebody that I talk to all the time, but that person is on my mind, I will reach out to that person just to make sure that they're okay. So I think that if we're intentional about that, just checking in on people from time to time, we can kind of normalize having conversations like we're having tonight.
I agree with all of that. I think I initially thought about it from a professional standpoint when we like talked about reimagining it. And I think that from a mental health systems perspective, there can be a lot of work on how do we kind of like make those spaces more visible for families or people that come in to work with us about like representation and thinking about who's providing care, and you know, really changing aspects of that to provide more support in that, like, you know, space. But I think from a community perspective, I think what we talked about earlier about vulnerability, about, like we said, like practicing it, but also creating space for it as well.
Can I add one more thing? I would go back to us preparing the generation behind us, so our children. So talking more to our children and making it okay for them to be emotional and giving them that space and knowing that it's okay to ask for help.
Yes, and this kind of goes with the next question that's coming up. What I will say is, as you create that space, I'm learning from experience, as you create the space and allow your children to have that full range of emotions, you have to be able to hold it when they express that full range of emotions. And so just being able to continue to be that safe space for them, or asking, or, you know, sort of showing up and supporting them as they're being more expressive in ways that maybe you didn't have the freedom to do or the space to do as you were the same age. And so one of the questions that's come up from the chat is, I love the idea of holding space for each other, but how do you hold space for someone without getting overwhelmed?
Well, I love the question because that just shows like the intentionality and like, okay, but what do we do? What's the practicality here? And, you know, I think it's practice, you know, I think, I don't know, just because like the work we do professionally, but even just like with my friends, it's like, I kind of am, you know, when people kind of come to me in a vulnerable space, I also have to say, like, if I'm not in the best space to hold it, if it's something heavy, you know, like as much as you can validate what it is, but then also be okay with your own boundary of like, but my capacity is here, right? But maybe there's other resources you can offer as support or suggestions you can give. And I think it's okay to like let things sit. I think sometimes the overwhelming feeling comes from feeling this need to fix it, feeling this need to change it, feeling this need to do something that we put on ourselves when we see people we care about struggle or have a hard time, right? And so like practicing you putting that need to do down and literally just being in it with someone. And I think that just takes practice and like recognizing that you too don't have to do anything to make it better.
I would add to that in my own personal experience. I think a lot of my challenge with having a family member who suffers from depression is that I wanted to fix it. Like I just wanted to go into her life and make things better. And I put that pressure on myself, you know? And so now I'm just listening, you know, I'm an ear for her. And some days that's enough. That's all she wants is to be heard.
I would definitely piggyback off of that, especially in dealing with a close family member who struggled with suicidal ideation. I used to carry this like responsibility of like, oh my God, if she calls, I have to always be available. And it was like this fear of like, I didn't want to lose this person because I love them so much. And so I think, you know, but it got better, and the balance for me was setting some boundaries around how I was going to be supportive, because, you know, you can give someone support or advice and their behavior is going to determine, and they have to determine if they're going to do something with that. And sometimes people aren't ready. And like you said, like it's their choice. And if, you know, you've offered what you can, being able to sit and say, okay, that's the choice like that you've made, and it's okay.
There's another question. So is there a specific type of therapy that works best for Black women, i.e. one who deals with childhood trauma versus one who focuses on practical techniques?
I can't speak on that personally, a specific type of therapy, but I can say this. I have tried and failed therapy many times over and over again. And what I found was I was being um, linked with therapists who were not Black, honestly. And it was a disconnect because I felt like I had to explain certain things. So this last time, I know Black therapists are unicorns, Loch Ness monsters, mermaids, but they are out there, right? So I specifically asked for a Black therapist, and thank God there was a Black female therapist there. So it really took down that layer of, oh God, now I had to explain, how I'm feeling about my son right now. She it was just it felt so good to be have a level of understanding off the bat. It really, now I just go in there and I'm like, God, why am I crying already? you know, but it feels so good to this is the first time, honestly, that I have been successful in therapy, like going to every appointment. Like today, she was like, I can't believe you came in here like that, like this today. I was like, no, this is for me, you know, you're my girl. We're not friends, but she my girl in my head. So so going to her, it gives me, I mean, it really fills me up. So finding those therapists that you can relate to. And I mean, it may not be a Black person all the time, but that was my experience, my personal experience.
But you're speaking to something that is important. We know that one of the keys to success in therapy is that rapport and that relationship with the provider. So it has to be someone that you're comfortable with. And as you think about the ways that where you're more likely to feel vulnerable, or what are the things that are important to you in allowing yourself that space, you can think about, is it a male? Is it a woman? Does it have to be someone who's Black? Are there certain religions or things that are important to you that you just don't want to explain in therapy? And then that'll help you with some of those searches. I also like to remind people that you are the one in charge as you're thinking about a therapist. I put some resources in the chat because someone asked about, like, are there ways to find online or Black female therapists? So I put in some directories that you can search. You can search by where someone is. So you can search by location if they're doing virtual or online, virtual or in person. You can look at their areas of expertise, but you also want to set up those initial consultations with providers. So providers have like these 10, 15-minute consultations where you can ask them questions. This is where you'll figure out, is this person a good fit for me? You can ask them, have you met with someone who's experienced something similar? If it's a white person, what is their stance, or what is their experience in working with a Black woman? You can talk, that's where you're going to talk about cost, their schedule availability, and all of the things to see where you feel comfortable. And then if you talk to a few people, it also gives you an idea of like, oh, I think I like this type of person first. So there's not a one size fits all when it comes to a therapist. If you find someone and it's not a good fit, okay, this didn't work, I'm gonna go to someone else. There are options, and I just want you all to have the resources so that we feel empowered in that process.
I was gonna just add, I didn't want to misspeak with the question about the direct type of like therapy that's specific for Black women, because I'm actually unclear for, if the evidence has been, validated in some of these instances. But I know that when talking about depression specifically, I always recommend cognitive behavioral therapy as a foundational perspective in kind of thinking about the approach to treatment, and it's really focusing on how our thoughts influence our feelings, how our feelings influence our behavior, and how that cycle kind of exists, and where you can kind of be intentional about intervening when it's going in a direction that doesn't feel helpful or doesn't feel healthy. There's a range of different types of therapy, methods, but that's one that's commonly used and has a lot of evidence behind it, specific for depression.
Okay, I was trying to, I still did it wrong. I was trying to add another chat thing to the chat. And so you can also, that is when you're interviewing the therapist, or as someone says, you're dating and sort of figuring out who feels like a good fit. Those are some of the questions that you can ask. What is their approach to therapy? And that's going to give you an idea too, as they're describing their approach or how they look at the process, or what are some of the techniques they commonly use. You can start to see what feels comfortable for you. Are there any other questions? I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, I don't see any more questions. So one thing we do have, before we end, we have a survey that we would like to get some feedback about this program, and if you would enjoy more programs like this or different things as well. So please fill out our questionnaire. What are some closing thoughts that the panelists have as it pertains to Black women and our health and wellness?
I would say practice being a cheerleader for yourself. It's wonderful to have all the support around you, and you're really lucky and blessed if you do, but practice being a cheerleader for your health, for your mental health, for your wellness, just your overall wellness. Practice doing that, and prioritize yourself, and don't feel guilty about it ever.
I would just want to, similarly echo, self-care and the things that we're talking about today as ways to stay in positive health is not a selfish act. It's a responsible act. It's an intentional set of choices. Not always easy, clearly, because we've all talked about the struggles that exist, but, to allow yourself some grace, like we talked about earlier, and being able to take a small step and recognizing that's still progress. And, to just keep practicing and to think about it as a practice. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you're constantly evolving and it'll get better.
I would say give from your overflow. You can't give from an empty cup. So I think a lot of us, we give from what we need. Put yourself first. Especially those of us who are mothers, we're like, oh, my kids come first. No, they do not. You come first. I cuss, but I'm not gonna cuss today. But I say something about those kids. So let them, they will be fine. And if you are not fine, they cannot be fine. So always give from your overflow. I tell myself that a lot. I say it all the time. I don't practice it all the time, but I'm sure working on it.
These are all great things for us to remember as we're all going to be committed after today to finding one thing that we can do to better take care of ourselves. Because we do know the impact and the stressors that Black women are facing, particularly how it has felt for Black women during the pandemic, being everything for everyone and oftentimes ignoring ourselves. And we cannot continue to live in this way. We're going to think about the ways that we can get rid of our time wasters, schedule ourselves on our calendars or have those days where we don't have anything scheduled, where we're going to show up as our human selves and not have to like pretty up what it is that we're truly experiencing. And something that I was also thinking about is while we're doing all of this work to take care of ourselves, when people come to us, when other Black women are coming to us and they're being their authentic selves, we also have to create that space of safety and start to extend that safety net among the community of women so that, you know, people aren't feeling ashamed for how they're feeling or what they're going through. So it has been, this conversation has been one that I really, really, really wanted to have. And it's been great having the discussion. I hope that you all have gotten just as much from it as I have today. I truly appreciate our panelists for sharing both your professional roles, but also those personal experiences, because I believe it is by sharing our stories and really having those vulnerable moments that we can contribute to real change and healing. And we begin to break down what stigma is, and we change also what it looks like to get therapy. So thank you everyone for showing up today. It has been a pleasure, and we just thank you for being a part of this conversation.